There's something quietly fascinating about the person who treats their birthday like any other Tuesday. You know them. They're the ones who casually mention their birthday passed last week when you ask about weekend plans. The ones who seem genuinely surprised when someone remembers the date. The ones who respond to birthday wishes with a slightly uncomfortable smile and a quick change of subject. But here's what's interesting. These aren't cold, detached people who've given up on joy. In fact, they're often the most emotionally intelligent individuals you'll meet. They're the ones who remember everyone else's special moments, who show up with thoughtful gifts, who make others feel celebrated. Yet when it comes to their own day, something shifts, something pulls back. What's really happening beneath that casual indifference? Because make no mistake, it's rarely actual indifference. There's a whole psychological landscape hidden behind those three words. It's just another day. Let me tell you about Sarah, successful marketing director, beloved by friends, always the first to organise surprise parties for others. But every year when her birthday approaches, she becomes a master of deflection. She'll book herself a work trip, schedule back-to-back meetings, anything to make the day feel normal, routine, forgettable. When her friends finally cornered her about it, asking why she never wants to celebrate, Sarah paused for a long moment. Then she said something that stuck with me. I stopped expecting magic a long time ago. That phrase unlocks something profound about human psychology. Because for many people who treat their birthdays like normal days, it's not about rejecting celebration. It's about managing expectation. It's about emotional self-preservation disguised as maturity. Think about childhood birthdays. Remember that electric anticipation, the way time seemed to crawl in the weeks leading up to your special day, the elaborate fantasies about gifts and surprises and feeling like the center of the universe for exactly 24 hours. Now fast forward to adulthood. That same anticipation can feel dangerous, vulnerable, because somewhere along the way, many of these individuals learned that excitement often leads to disappointment, that hoping too loud means falling too hard. Psychologists call this phenomenon emotional regulation through expectation management. It's when the brain develops protective mechanisms against potential letdown. You can't be disappointed if you don't expect anything. You can't feel forgotten if you never reminded anyone to remember. But here's where it gets psychologically complex. This isn't depression. It's not even necessarily sadness. It's a form of emotional intelligence that's learned to prioritize stability over excitement. The mind essentially says, I'd rather have consistent peace than unpredictable joy. Dr. Rachel Morgan, who studies attachment patterns in adults, explains it this way. When someone repeatedly experiences unmet expectations around significant events, the brain adapts by lowering the emotional stakes. It's not giving up on happiness. It's finding a different path to emotional safety. This adaptation often begins in childhood, but not always in obvious ways. Maybe their parents were overwhelmed and birthdays felt like burdens rather than celebrations. Maybe they grew up in a family where emotional needs were seen as inconvenient. Or maybe they simply learned early that being low maintenance earned more love than being demanding. These experiences create what researchers call avoidance celebration patterns. The person learns to associate special attention with potential rejection or disappointment, so they preemptively remove themselves from the equation. They become the giver, never the receiver, the planner, never the celebrated. But there's another layer to this psychology that's equally fascinating. Many people who don't celebrate their birthdays have developed an almost supernatural ability to find meaning in ordinary moments. They've learned that joy doesn't need a calendar date. That significance doesn't require external validation. Take Marcus, a teacher who's never taken his birthday off work. When asked why, he said, "Every day I connect with my students feels like a celebration. Why would I need one specific day to feel grateful for being alive?" This perspective represents a form of emotional evolution. Instead of concentrating happiness into designated celebration days, these individuals have learned to distribute it across their entire existence. It's like the difference between binge eating and mindful eating. One creates dramatic peaks and valleys, the other creates sustainable nourishment. Yet beneath this philosophical approach, there's often a more complex emotional reality. Because even the most emotionally evolved person still carries some part of their childhood self. The part that once believed birthdays were magical. The part that still secretly wonders what it would feel like to be surprised, celebrated, made to feel special without having to orchestrate it themselves. This creates an internal tension that many people never fully resolve. On one hand, they've genuinely outgrown the need for external validation. They've found peace in ordinary days and meaning in routine moments. On the other hand, there's still a small voice that whispers, what if someone remembered? What if someone cared enough to make this day different? The psychology becomes even more nuanced when you consider how these individuals handle other people's birthdays. They often become the ultimate gift givers, party planners, and memory keepers. They remember dates that others forget. They show up with thoughtful gestures that demonstrate deep understanding of what makes each person feel loved. This pattern reveals something profound about their emotional makeup. They haven't lost the ability to recognize the importance of celebration. They've simply redirected that energy outward rather than inward. They've become experts at creating the very experiences they've learned not to expect for themselves. But why this redirection? Why become the giver rather than the receiver? The answer lies in control. When you're the one planning and giving, you control the emotional variables. You know exactly what will happen and when. There are no surprises that could disappoint, no expectations that might go unmet. You get the satisfaction of creating joy without the vulnerability of needing it. This psychological strategy works beautifully in many ways. These individuals often have rich, fulfilling relationships. They're known for their generosity and thoughtfulness. They derive genuine pleasure from making others feel special. But there's a cost to this emotional arrangement that often goes unnoticed, even by the person themselves. The cost is reciprocity. When you train everyone around you to believe you don't want or need special treatment, they often comply. Friends stop offering to celebrate. Family members learn not to make a big deal. Partners assume you're genuinely uninterested in birthday gestures. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the very thing they're protecting themselves from, being forgotten or overlooked, actually becomes more likely to happen. Not because people don't care, but because they've been taught that caring isn't wanted. The irony is striking. In trying to protect themselves from disappointment, they often create the exact conditions that would disappoint them if they still allowed themselves to feel disappointed. But remember, this isn't a story of sadness or dysfunction. This is a story of adaptation. These individuals have developed sophisticated coping mechanisms that serve them well in many areas of life. They're often incredibly resilient, self-sufficient, and emotionally stable. They've learned to find joy independently rather than depending on others to create it for them. The question isn't whether this approach is right or wrong. The question is whether it's serving them fully, or whether there's room for a more nuanced approach that honors both their need for emotional safety and their fundamental human desire for connection and recognition. Human desire for connection and recognition. What's particularly fascinating is how these individuals navigate the subtle social contract around birthdays. They've become masters of a complex emotional dance that most people never consciously recognize. They'll mention their birthday casually after the fact, almost as an afterthought, as if testing the waters, gauging whether anyone would have cared if they'd known in advance. This post-birthday revelation serves multiple psychological functions. It protects them from real-time disappointment while still allowing them to measure how much they matter to others. It's a way of saying, I didn't need you to remember, but I'm quietly curious whether you would have wanted to. The responses they receive become data points in their internal emotional filing system. Oh, Jennifer seemed genuinely upset she missed it. That means something. But David just shrugged and moved on. That means something too. They're collecting evidence about their place in other people's lives without ever having to directly ask for it. This behavior reveals something profound about human psychology. Even the most emotionally self-sufficient people still need to know they matter. They just need to know it in ways that feel safe, ways that don't require them to be vulnerable or demanding or disappointed. But there's another psychological pattern at work here that's even more subtle. Many people who don't celebrate their birthdays have developed what researchers call temporal displacement. They've learned to find their sense of specialness in moments that aren't predetermined by the calendar. Instead of feeling celebrated on their birthday, they might feel deeply moved by an unexpected compliment on a random Tuesday. Instead of anticipating gifts on their special day, they might treasure a thoughtful text message that arrives on a completely ordinary Thursday. They've essentially scattered their birthday throughout the entire year, finding small celebrations in unexpected moments. This approach actually demonstrates remarkable emotional intelligence. They've recognized that genuine care and affection can't be scheduled, that the most meaningful gestures often happen spontaneously, not because a calendar told someone it was time to show love. Yet this scattered approach to celebration creates its own psychological complexity. Because while spontaneous moments of recognition feel authentic and meaningful, they're also unpredictable and rare. These individuals often go long stretches without feeling particularly special to anyone, punctuated by brief moments of unexpected warmth. The psychological impact of this pattern is subtle but significant. It can create a kind of emotional hunger that they're not even fully aware of. A chronic low-level longing for recognition that gets briefly satisfied and then returns to its baseline state of quiet wanting. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who specializes in adult attachment styles, describes this as emotional grazing versus emotional feasting. She explains, some people concentrate their need for recognition into specific events like birthdays, creating emotional feasts. Others spread it out across time, emotional grazing throughout the year. Neither approach is inherently better, but grazing can sometimes leave people chronically undernourished without realizing it. This undernourishment manifests in interesting ways. These individuals might find themselves disproportionately affected by small slights or oversights. A forgotten lunch date might sting more than it should. A missed phone call might feel more significant than it ordinarily would. They're not being dramatic or oversensitive. Their emotional system is simply operating on lower reserves, making small disappointments feel larger than they might for someone who regularly experiences concentrated celebration. But there's also a beautiful resilience in this approach to life. People who don't celebrate their birthdays often develop an extraordinary capacity for finding meaning in subtle moments. They notice things others miss, the way someone's face lights up when they enter a room, the extra warmth in a goodbye hug, the thoughtful pause before someone responds to their question. They've become connoisseurs of micro-expressions and small gestures. They can read emotional subtleties that escape others entirely. This heightened sensitivity to genuine human connection often makes them incredibly intuitive friends and partners, even if they struggle to ask for what they need directly. The irony is that their reluctance to celebrate themselves often makes them more attuned to celebrating others. They've developed an almost professional level of expertise in recognizing what makes each person in their life feel valued. They know exactly when to send the encouraging text, when to show up with coffee, when to simply listen without offering solutions. This outward focus on others' emotional needs serves another psychological function. It allows them to experience the joy of celebration vicariously. They get to feel the satisfaction of creating special moments without having to endure the vulnerability of receiving them. It's celebration at arm's length, where they control the variables and the outcomes. But what happens when this carefully constructed emotional system encounters someone who refuses to accept their self-imposed limitations? Someone who insists on celebrating them despite their protests? Someone who sees through their casual indifference to the longing underneath? This psychological response is often surprisingly intense. Some feel overwhelming gratitude mixed with discomfort. Others experience a kind of emotional whiplash, where years of suppressed longing suddenly surface all at once. Many describe feeling simultaneously seen and exposed, grateful and terrified. This reaction reveals just how much emotional energy has been invested in their protective strategies. When someone breaks through their defenses with genuine care, it can feel like emotional flooding, beautiful and overwhelming at the same time. The challenge becomes learning how to receive without losing the emotional safety they've worked so hard to create. How to open themselves to celebration without becoming dependent on it. How to integrate their capacity for joy with their need for emotional security. This integration doesn't happen overnight. It requires a delicate recalibration of their entire emotional system. Learning to trust that disappointment won't destroy them, that unmet expectations don't negate their worth, that hoping for something doesn't make them weak or demanding or childish. But perhaps the most profound realization for many of these individuals comes when they understand that their approach to birthdays isn't really about birthdays at all. It's about their relationship with being seen, with being valued, with taking up space in other people's lives. It's about whether they believe they deserve to be celebrated simply for existing, not for what they do or give or accomplish. This recognition often marks the beginning of a deeper emotional journey, one that doesn't necessarily end with elaborate birthday celebrations, but with a more nuanced understanding of their own worth and their capacity for both giving and receiving love. The transformation doesn't require a complete personality overhaul. It's more like learning a new language while still speaking your native tongue fluently. These individuals don't need to become people who demand attention or crave elaborate celebrations. They simply need to expand their emotional vocabulary to include the possibility of graceful receiving. What's remarkable is how this shift affects their relationships with time itself. People who've spent years treating their birthday like any other day often have a complex relationship with their own timeline. They might struggle to see their life as a narrative worth celebrating. Instead, they view it as a series of ordinary moments strung together by routine and responsibility. This temporal flattening serves a protective function. If no day is special, then no day can disappoint. If every day is equally ordinary, then you never have to confront the weight of another year passing, or the questions that birthdays inevitably raise. Questions like, am I where I thought I'd be? Have I become who I wanted to become? What do I have to show for another trip around the sun? For many, this avoidance isn't conscious. They're not deliberately running from existential reflection. They've simply learned that birthdays have a way of highlighting gaps between expectation and reality, between dreams and circumstances, between the life they imagined and the life they're actually living. Dr. Michael Chen, who researches what he calls milestone aversion, explains this phenomenon. Birthdays force a kind of temporal accounting that many people find uncomfortable. They create natural points of reflection that some individuals would rather avoid. It's not denial exactly, but it's a form of emotional time management. This explains why some people who don't celebrate their birthdays also struggle with other milestone events. Anniversaries might pass unnoticed. New Year's resolutions get dismissed as arbitrary. Even positive milestones like promotions or achievements get downplayed rather than celebrated. There's a consistency to this pattern that reveals something deeper about how these individuals process their own progress through life. They've learned to find meaning in process rather than in moments, in the daily showing up rather than in the ceremonial acknowledgement of showing up. But this approach creates an interesting psychological paradox. While they become experts at appreciating the journey, they often lose touch with their own growth along the way. Without regular moments of reflection and acknowledgement, they might not fully recognize how much they've changed, learned, or accomplished. Or Sarah, the marketing director we met earlier, discovered this during a conversation with an old friend who hadn't seen her in years. Her friend kept marveling at how different she seemed, how much more confident and grounded. Sarah found herself genuinely surprised by these observations. She'd been so focused on the daily work of becoming that she hadn't noticed the transformation itself. This is another hidden cost of avoiding celebratory moments. Without periodic pause and acknowledgement, personal growth can become invisible even to the person experiencing it. They're too close to their own evolution to see it clearly, and they've trained themselves not to look for it in milestone moments. The psychology becomes even more nuanced when you consider how these individuals handle aging itself. Birthdays aren't just about celebration, they're also about the passage of time, about mortality and meaning, and the relentless forward motion of existence. For some, treating birthdays like normal days is a way of making peace with aging without having to confront it directly. If you don't mark the years, they feel less significant. If you don't count them ceremonially, they carry less weight. But this approach can create a strange relationship with their own timeline. They might feel simultaneously younger and older than their actual age. Younger because they haven't been formally acknowledging the passage of years. Older because they've been carrying the weight of time without the relief that comes from periodic celebration and reflection. Marcus, the teacher we heard from earlier, described it this way. I feel like I'm still 25 in my head, but my body keeps reminding me I'm not. I skipped so many birthdays that I lost track of becoming 43. It's like I was walking backward and suddenly turned around to find myself in middle age. This temporal disorientation isn't necessarily problematic, but it can create moments of jarring self-recognition. Looking in the mirror and being surprised by their own reflection, realizing their cultural references are now dated, noticing that young people see them as definitively adult in ways that feel foreign to their internal experience. The solution isn't necessarily to start throwing elaborate birthday parties. It's about finding ways to honor the passage of time that feel authentic to their emotional makeup. Some discover that private rituals work better than public celebrations. A solo hike on their birthday, a favorite meal prepared with intention, a handwritten letter to their future self. Others find meaning in marking the day through service, volunteering at a shelter, donating to causes they care about, using their birthday as an annual reminder to contribute something meaningful to the world beyond themselves. These alternative approaches to birthday acknowledgement reveal something beautiful about human adaptability. There's no single right way to mark the significance of another year of existence. The key is finding an approach that honours both their need for emotional safety and their fundamental humanity. What's particularly moving is watching someone who's spent years avoiding birthday celebration slowly experiment with different ways of acknowledging the day. The tentative steps toward allowing themselves to be seen and celebrated. The gradual recognition that they can set the terms of their own recognition. This process often involves redefining what celebration means, moving away from external validation toward internal appreciation, less about what others do for them and more about what they do for themselves. Less about grand gestures and more about quiet acknowledgement. But perhaps the most profound shift happens when they begin to understand that their worth isn't conditional on their comfort with celebration, that they can be valuable and beloved regardless of whether they ever learn to gracefully receive birthday wishes, that their friends and family don't love them less because they're complicated about special attention. This recognition often brings a deep sense of relief. They don't have to change to be worthy of love. They don't have to become different people to deserve celebration. They can remain exactly who they are while still allowing space for others to express care in whatever ways feel natural. The psychology of people who don't celebrate their birthdays ultimately isn't a problem to be solved. It's a human variation to be understood, a different way of moving through the world that has its own wisdom and its own limitations. These individuals have something valuable to teach the rest of us about finding meaning in ordinary moments, about the difference between needing validation and wanting connection, about the courage it takes to protect your own emotional well-being even when others don't understand your choices. They remind us that there are many ways to honour a life, many ways to mark significance, many ways to express gratitude for existence itself. Sometimes, the quietest celebrations are the most profound. Sometimes, the people who seem to need the least recognition are the ones who've learned to recognise themselves most clearly. And maybe that's the real gift they offer the world. Not just their capacity to celebrate others, but their demonstration that meaning doesn't require fanfare, that significance doesn't need external validation, that a life well lived can be honoured in whispers as powerfully as in shouts, fully as in shouts. So the next time you encounter someone who treats their birthday like just another Tuesday, remember that you're witnessing a complex psychological masterpiece in action. Behind that casual shrug lies a person who's learned to navigate the delicate balance between self-protection and connection, between independence and intimacy, between giving and receiving. They're not broken, they're not missing out, they're not emotionally stunted or ungrateful. They're simply human beings who've developed their own sophisticated system for finding meaning in existence without depending on external validation to confirm their worth. Maybe they've discovered something the rest of us are still learning. That celebration doesn't always need confetti to be real. That recognition doesn't require fanfare to be meaningful. That sometimes the deepest form of self-love is knowing exactly what you need to feel safe in the world, even if others don't understand those needs. And perhaps that's the most beautiful paradox of all. These individuals who seem to need the least recognition often end up teaching us the most about what genuine appreciation looks like. Not the performative kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that notices everything. The kind that shows up without being asked. The kind that remembers what matters to you even when you've forgotten it yourself. So whether you're someone who throws elaborate birthday celebrations or someone who prefers to let the day pass quietly, know that both approaches are valid ways of honouring your existence. The goal isn't to change who you are, it's to understand who you are more deeply. And in that understanding, perhaps we all learn something about the infinite ways there are to be human, to be seen, and to matter in this world.